Good evening, everyone. I call the January 16th, 2024 special board meeting to order. It is 6 p.m. and we're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Dr. Hoyt.
Excused.
Recording in progress. Ms. Willis.
Excused.
Dr. Worley.
Here.
Ms. Heimer-Rolland.
Here.
Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Here. And we do have a quorum this evening. We begin with an opportunity for public comment. Could someone grab a phone? You do a 30-minute timer. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issues raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda members are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there anyone in the room who would like to comment this evening? Seeing none, Jamie, is there anyone online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Okay. And with that, we will close public comment for this evening. We will move forward with 2 second readings and possible action to approve policies. Ms. Heimer-Rolland.
It is recommended that the school board approve revisions to policy 8395, student mental health services, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Can we do a
quick.
walkthrough of any changes and Dr. Worley, can we do a kind of a high level, any changes that we've made or any major changes to this policy at all? And then since the last conversation we had, if there has been any.
So at all this is a new policy and we need it because we have in the past had vendors and Mr. Pena, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
This is a new policy and a needed policy. This really opens the door for therapeutic services to be provided by licensed and credentialed therapists that are working with students already, but to do it during school day, school hours with parameters in place in order to ensure there's still a free and appropriate public education if the student has an IEP, as well as just some assurances that we're allowing licensed, credentialed providers in buildings, as well as having agreements with them. There's a lot of pieces of training, confidentiality. So just really some fences that are needed versus allowing it without any of those pieces in place. So this opens the door in a safe way.
And the newest piece, I think we added virtual.
Yes, we
Right,
added
so
to
what's come in since the last time is virtual.
Virtual?
Yeah, we did not have the statement, the word virtual in there before. And we have not had comments or requests from board members. But we need to bring this back again because we had requests from Mr. Pinion's office to update it. So, and to include virtual, because that's how some providers deliver their services.
Understood. Any questions from the board on this item or any comments? Seeing none, Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt. Ms. Willis. Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Heimer-Rolland.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And the student mental health services 8395 passes. Thank you. The next item up is a second reading and or action to approve policy 5113, open enrollment inter-district. Dr. Worley.
It is recommended that the school board approve revisions to policy 5113, open enrollment program inter-district, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Heimer-Rolland. Dr. Worley?
The overview. So, as I mentioned last time, I won't spend a lot of time on this. We are doing the following. We're asking to change the wording to district-wide instead of school-wide for the consideration of numbers, potential numbers and recommendations on open enrollment. So for identifying the number of seats, we're asking for that to be done on district-wide. That's one. Secondly, we are confirming the tuition waiver policy that's been in effect, and we tried to add some more clarity. So we have added under full-time open enrollment, Part A, clarity about who this applies to, new open enrollment approvals only, and non-resident open enrollment applicants. I wanted to make clear after the board, that's the one thing that we were asked to change after the first reading, which was to make it clear that we were not talking about eliminating someone who's already in an open enrollment program. And then we also, in this policy, have the details about using the matrix that we get from DPI and making sure that we are following that with fidelity to set timing. And then we are also in this policy removing the way under Part to C, decisional criteria for non-resident applications. We're removing the way that it was put in for last year, and we are replacing that with having a proposal each year of minimum, mid, or max based upon numbers in the study, and that will be presented each year by the administration, and then the board will have an opportunity at a separate meeting to, as we've been talking about, to set the numbers. And then we are also making clear in this policy the basis, so Part C, number 4, the reason why someone might be not able, or the current policy, if they're under an order of expulsion, what needs to happen. And then we also have reapplication procedure guidelines. This was all in the last time. This is not new. Like I said, the only thing new was the clarification of the language around current open enrollment students. And then termination of open enrollment, new this year, but not new to from the first reading, is the guidelines about when we would actually ask someone to leave open enrollment. We also have in this policy of interest to the board, although there's no changes to it, how waiting list procedures happen. And then at the very end, we've updated the title of when and how, and the discussion of description of when and how policy can be reviewed. This is getting us in alignment with the state expectations on that.
I'll add one piece. There is also clarification. We wanted to be very transparent with families. I'm just trying to find the section under number 4, section B4, about honoring the message that has been sent to our currently attending students who have already been applied for or have applied for a tuition waiver that's been accepted for the current year, that they would essentially be grandfathered into the historical practice of a guarantee of being into open enrollment, which would end then at the end of the open enrollment period. And then we would switch to practicing the policy as is written as the preference.
Thank you for pointing that out. So that was a response to board discussion as well.
Thank you all for making these changes and adjustments. Board questions or comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig, Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer,
Yes. Did you hear me?
yes, thank you. Dr. Jessup
Okay,
Banger,
sorry.
Yes, and this item passes the modifications from the policy committee on open enrollment program interdistrict. Thank you very much for your work with the administrative team on this.
And I'd like to thank the administrative team. I mean, they've answered a huge number of questions over the last month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe.
Possibly years. We are now going to move into first reading on several policies. Mr. Morris, you've been pointed to, so I take you're going to walk us through. And can you share a little bit about how you plan to approach this? There's a lot of these. We're doing a special meeting just so we can kind of set the board up for success of our pace and cadence through these.
So in clarification of that, would you like full readings or would you like the synopsis readings of the material changes that we have or any modifications?
I will put that back. My preference would be the modifications are kind of high level highlights.
Gonna do the 0000, the bylaws, and then we'll switch off so we don't get bored with
Outstanding.
voices.
But I would look to the members of the board, if anyone disagrees with that, if they want to do a deep dive, we can do that. But if you've got any clarifications as we go, the board has had these policies in front of them for a while, and I presume is read, and so they may come with questions, but
These were from a while ago
Yeah.
too. So there are a couple in here that we may want to slow down and take some notes on. We'll be glad to point that out as we get there if board members want us to.
sounds good. Thank you.
So we'll start with policy 0145, board member anti-harassment. And in this policy here, the only substantive change, it was really just the inclusion of adding that the board believes that sexual speech be clarified in there and making that change to one of the forms of offensive speech in there. That's really the only change we have there to the anti-harassment of board members for that policy for 0145. Is that anything that
No legal alignment.
that was legal alignment? We can proceed to B for the first reading of 0152 on officers. And so in this one, we've changed and added in here clarification here. So that way you'll see the under the officers, the president and vice president are not eligible for more than 2 consecutive 1-year terms. And then we also included an officer may be removed for cause by a majority vote of the full board. And then under the election section, I'll read this section because it is pretty, I think a lot of people have some interest in the election procedures. Board officers will be nominated and elected in the following order: president, vice president, treasurer, clerk. Our ballots, the board secretary will prepare ballots to be used in the nomination and election process. Board members will be listed alphabetically by last name. For nomination, each board member shall receive 1 ballot for the purpose of nominating an officer. The secretary will collect the ballots and identify the nominees. Under election, each board member will receive 1 ballot for the purpose of electing a board member. There is no provision for absentee ballots. And after each round of voting, the secretary will collect the ballots and read the total votes received by each candidate. Voting will continue with separate ballots each round until one nominee has a simple majority of votes. Any nominee may ask that his or her name be removed from consideration before ballots are distributed for each round of voting. Ballots shall be counted by 2 persons, and all ballots shall be preserved in accordance with policy 8310 under public records. And that concludes our policy 0152 modifications.
I believe that election section was written to actually just reflect what we do.
Correct. Moving forward to first reading of policy 0155 under committees. Let's see. I believe in here, the only major addition here was, in addition to the committee meetings, may provide a period of public comment. Opening that and just bringing us up to date with legal.
Change participation to comment.
Yep.
This is Meyer. May I be recognized?
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
On the election of officers, 2 comments. There was a question that came up years ago, and I did some research on it at the time, that when the person counting the ballots counts them, the question is, well, what if a board member doesn't mark a ballot? And so we have 7 board members there, and there are 6 ballots. There were legal decisions in 2 state courts, not Wisconsin, that said that election would be voided because the absence of one ballot had no explanation. So, and this would be something to take back to Neola because it's their policy and we didn't really tinker with it, that there needs to be every attending member of the board must vote either for somebody or abstain. So that would be the suggestion there. My second comment has to do with changing officers. The requiring that it be done for cause, that invokes questions as to what is sufficient cause. So again, to go back to Neola, I'm not really into tinkering with the Neola standard here, but do you really want to say that officers can be, like, say you wanted a different treasurer, right, or a different clerk? What's cause? I mean, why do we need to have a cause? It actually is I don't mean a partisan, but it's in legal terminology, it's a political decision. And I don't mean that like campaigns or anything like that. It's the will of the board, who their officers will be. Why can't the board just make a change if they want to? And now, obviously, for retaliation for something, we wouldn't want to allow that. But if the board just doesn't like the job that's being done, but doesn't want to declare cause. So, this is not a hill I would die on. I'm just providing some feedback here that I'm not sure why we need to state that there be cause. But if that's what Neola thinks, I'm fine with that. Thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. We'll make note of that for our next meeting.
Committees, all right. Let's see, policy 0155 under committees. This was pretty much complete update just for legal and the portion there, Lynn, that we added for
For public comment.
just public comment was added.
Yeah. Mr. Meyer, did you have anything on 0155 before we move on?
Sorry, I'm on mute here and I have to find the unmute button. So no, I have no further comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, moving forward to 0162 forum. And so we have in here the deletion of majority of the full board and change to 4 members, number 4, numerically 4 members present at meeting shall constitute a quorum when no board vacancies exist. Questions moving forward to policy 0164.3 virtual meetings. And the only change here was removing the district administrator and updating it with the term superintendent.
I have one thought that came to me as I reread this tonight, which is that sometimes we've had subcommittees not have somebody present in a room. Do we want wording to handle that? Or are we going to say there always has to be someone?
I get what you're saying.
Concrete example, Liz and I have been posting our meetings publicly, as we should, in order to get ready for engagement sessions. Do we always have to have someone here at the offices on that meeting in order to hold them?
I don't know if there's a state law on that, but if there's not, I don't have any strong opinion. As long as it's accessible to be able to be viewed by the public. Having flashbacks to sitting in this room by myself throughout the pandemic.
I just wonder if we want wording at all on that.
Yeah.
We can ask Neola.
Yeah, I think that would be worth
Thanks,
asking. Any board members have any strong opinions on having somebody that must be present physically?
This is Meyer. May I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
I would ask why there needs to be the person physically present for the full board meeting, and if that similar logic applies to the committee. Well, that'd be my only question. If there was a good reason to have the in-person anchor for a full board meeting, why is it okay? I mean, maybe I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion either, Dr. Jessup Anchor. I'm just curious as to why it would be required for one type of meeting but not for another.
That's fair.
That's all I have.
My only recollection is this was a local policy that we put together to allow the board to meet virtually right at the outset of the pandemic. So
It's a local policy.
so I'm not sure if I don't recall any specific conversation on that point.
May I be recognized again?
Yes, sir.
I wouldn't, just my thought process here. I mean, these committee meetings, that's a lot of work for people. And if to require in-person presence would discourage having an active committee process, then of course I wouldn't want, and none of us would want to discourage an active committee process. I can understand why for a full board meeting when we have final vote, sure. So I just don't want to be persnickety and require personal presence. I suppose that begs the question then. So I don't see a need to require personal presence for committees myself. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
All right, continuing to 0166 under agenda. The only change here was the addition to the board president and the superintendent shall prepare and submit to each board member an agenda prior to each regular meeting and each special meeting unless otherwise directed by the board. Questions? Next, policy 016.
Wait, please.
Go ahead,
May
Mike.
I comment? What if the meeting is about the superintendent? Well, that's a regular meeting. Oh, each special meeting as well. I mean, I see why we want the superintendent involved actively in setting the meeting agenda. Or what if the superintendent is incapacitated? Of course, nobody's going to stop us from calling a meeting, but I think it's the board's meeting and the board president sets the agenda with the advice of the superintendent. But to say that the superintendent shall be there and limit the ability of the board president to call a meeting of the board, maybe that's too restrictive for us. That's all I have. Thanks.
Don't we have a policy already that sort of determines the line? Like if the superintendent is incapacitated, then this would take over their duties. So I would assume that would be covered in these policies as well.
Yes, Ms. Hammerall, great point. Mr. Meyer, I'm not sure you heard outside the room, but Ms. Hammerall noted that we have a delineation of if the superintendent is incapacitated, where does the duties flow? And I believe that would just then kind of flow the responsibilities to that individual.
Yes, I embrace that and recognize it. I still would not limit the power of the board president to call a meeting of the board regarding employees. But it's not a hill I'll die on, It's not that big a thing. I'm just trying to provide a nuance to it. That's all I have. Thanks.
Worth asking Neola if it makes sense to put the board president and or the superintendent
Well,
as a possibility. I don't know the ramifications, but a question for Neola to consider. I don't have concerns either way.
Could you also just see what most districts have in the
Yeah,
area?
they could give us that feedback. Yeah. Interestingly, it was just the superintendent before, so.
Correct. Right, moving on to policy 0166.1 on the consent agenda. Only major change here was under the routine business items, section line C. Instead of hiring personnel, there's a clarification there to specify hiring of non-administrative personnel. Moving on to policy 0167.5, the use of electronic mail. Let's see. This is just an update. We have nothing here, do we, Lynn?
This is new.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the ones that I would say, hopefully board members looked at it because we had some discussion, about the concurrent copy of the response. It's actually not new, it's 2016, sent to the superintendent. I don't think it's just marked. The green is missing. Because we've looked at,
Yeah.
this has come up before.
Say the part where we copy the superintendent on it.
That's F. We had a discussion on this already. This copy that's on tonight's agenda is not the marked up one. But it is, but I don't think the wording is off. I think this is what we talked about. As a first read, but do people have suggestions? I think it was F that had the most conversation previously.
That's correct. It was up.
Mhm. I don't know if we, one thing that struck me in looking at this, because now we've done the open records one, if we should notify, if we should cross list the open records policy in here too, because we explicitly talk about that then being handled by the superintendent's office. So we could just check whether we should cross-reference that in E.
Makes sense.
All right, moving forward to 0167.6, email public records. And the only change here is under the email public records, the addition of whenever a board member receives a public records request, as you're mentioning, Lynn, the board member shall inform the superintendent who shall use the district's procedures for acting on the public records request. At no time should a board member respond to a public records request.
May I be recognized, Mayor here?
Yes, sir.
That sentence, at no time should a board member respond to a public records request. Standing alone, that could literally be read to be not, it seems like at no time should a board member respond to a public records request, like, except through the superintendent's office or something like that. That maybe I'm being too literal here, but that sentence standing alone says don't comply with the law. But that's not what we're trying to say. We're trying to say we want some due diligence review of responses to public records requests, and a board member shouldn't go off on their own in response.
Thank you.
But it's a small notation.
We'll talk, we'll putting that in on the next revision. Thank you.
There,
Here,
Liz,
I'm done.
it's just that there's changing some wording there as we look at the next time to directly responding to the public records request.
Mhm.
Okay. Response.
Then for policy use of electronic mail, that's confusing with E then. Because it says a board member does utilize electronic mail and may be used.
I said we should, yeah. Oh, we need to work on that one because, no, it was just that we need to cross-reference
Okay.
that.
Moving on to policy 0175, association memberships. I'm going to read this one. So there's some changes here or additions. The board may maintain membership in the National School Boards Association, Consortium of State School Board Associations, Wisconsin Association of School Boards, and may take part in the activities of these groups. The board may also maintain institutional memberships in other educational organizations, which the superintendent and the board find to be of benefit to the members and district personnel. Addition, should an individual board member seek or be asked to serve on an outside school association, committee, or group, board approval is required prior to assuming the role. So that last section there, for board member, individual board member participation has to have board approval.
Clarifying question on this one. Are there limits? So are we talking about K-12 education, things that are really specific to the district? So like a PTA, PTO, Wauwatosa Education Foundation. I think for me, I'd like a little bit more clarity on the limits of this because I suspect board members might serve on different boards and so on. And so is it every board or is it limited to those with the direct focus on the Wauwatosa School District, or kind of what this could be one that would be really easy to violate if you weren't, it wasn't top of mind.
I would agree. So I think in some cases, probably many of us probably already are members of other associations potentially, and wouldn't want to be in violation based on the wording of it right now.
Clear that school association, school committee, or school group, and then a little bit more clarity on what we mean by school.
And then is approval, is that majority of the board would need to approve it? Just have one else.
In my mind, that would almost ideally go on a consent agenda. If appropriate.
Yep.
And if somebody wanted to pull it
May I
off.
be recognized?
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I agree with what everybody's saying, and I'm not sure how we clarify this. Because, we are all citizens and we have a right to free association. Okay. Couple of you at least, are educators who work in other areas. And I'm totally agreeing with what Dr. Joseph Anger said. It's like, does everything, each of you do in your professional lives outside of the school district? I mean, this is a hard one to my thinking. This is a hard one to be correctly stated. And I think I understand what we're saying. If you're going to be on some thing that directly affects K-12 education in Wauwatosa, we can't have, multiple voices out there in the community speaking, maybe, under impression that they're speaking for, for the whole school district or whatever. I get all that. But how do we set the boundary here? I mean, how do you describe the line? We know there is one, but how do we describe it? That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Right, moving on to the last of the 0175.1, school board conferences, conventions, and workshops. And only material change here is the addition of the expenses. So under each board member is expected to report back to the board after attending a conference at district expense. The expenses will be reimbursed in accordance with bylaw 0144.1 under compensation. Yes. And that is all we have for those. We need a deep breath before we went to the eights. Lynn?
Good eights.
Okay.
Like policy jockeys tonight. All right, so. Eight one two zero volunteers. there anything that people want added or pulled off? Without seeing green, what this is probably telling us this is a new, we didn't have this before. Not hearing anything to change. We will move on to Mr. Meyer. Did you have anything on the volunteers policy?
No, no comment.
All right.
Thanks.
Personal background check 8121. Again, this is a newly added policy. This is related to contracted services. So we want to make sure that those we are hiring have the appropriate background check by their contractor or their subcontractor if they're going to have ongoing contact with children in the course of providing services to the district. Anything that's crossed out but in pink is what we decided not to add from the options offered by Neola. Any comments or questions? Okay. 8141. Required reporting of staff conduct. We are just making an alignment of wording here, removing of education because in all our policies now we talk about the board. Is there anything else that people have questions about? All right. We will move on to 8145. Annual reports. This is a new policy. I'm just getting my notes so I can give you background. This is coming to you because we don't have this policy. And I believe that is a DPI requires it. All right. Hearing no current comments, we'll move on to 8146, notification of educational options. This is also a new policy. And yes, we do have to notify of all these people of all these different educational options.
A practical question, how does the district notify the public of all of the options?
So,
go ahead,
I was going to say some of these are standardized in our yearly processes, such as the school count. So each one of them has a different mechanism. Some are easier that the DPI has, some are straight pulls, and others we kind of push into their space.
Okay, we'll go to 8220, school day, school closure, also very prescient for
Does that happen every week?
the change here is superintendent instead of administrator. It's a common change we've been doing. And we took off the prepare appropriate guidelines for communication to students and parents because that's more of an procedure than it is a policy. The policy seems to be working, so we've tested it rigorously. Continuity, 8300 continuity of organizational operations plan. This is a really fun one. This is what we need to have in place. Should the district have a threat or conditions without warning, a disaster happens, there's an emergency, and this outlines how the continuity of the services and education will be done, and then how this will be reviewed.
This one I actually did have a question on. Can you talk through the reasoning between choosing periodic as opposed to annual and strengths and weaknesses that the committee and or administration viewed?
So we accepted as a committee what the administration recommended.
When you look at the top paragraph, you will see that there are multiple functions of the organization that we have to continue to plan for. So to do all of that annually would be difficult. We will take each of those operations and conduct some type of analysis on an annual basis. I think we have had ample opportunity to test all of this. When you look at teaching and learning, we should probably, maybe that's a catch, with maybe changing it to academic performance. But when you look at what we had to go through with COVID, what we may have to go through with asynchronous learning, if there are more closure days. Our conversation at the committee level also talked about the digital impact of how a ransom is being asked for from a digital standpoint with organizations. So that's the reason why we went with pediatric. We stayed away from annual.
Okay.
May I comment?
Yes, Mr. Meyer.
Does this include, for example, train derailment in the village with hazardous material discharge, for example, and certain radius has to be evacuated from the city? And this has happened, right? This has happened a few places in the United States the past few years. So I'm not that we solve it tonight, but does it include this type of thing?
So,
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So we will go to 8305, information security. This is also new. Same thing. Do you have a question? Periodic is more to make the district be able to be adaptive. So. All right. We'll move on to 8309, open meetings for non-board committees.
The item on here that I was perplexed by is the questions. And I wasn't sure the analysis of determining whether or not a committee should be posting for an open meeting or not.
I believe this comes from open meetings law because UWM uses the same questions. I just had training on it. Mhm.
So that I found to be, if I was a community member, hard to follow.
I think it's the same test, Dr. Joseph Anger, that legal would use to advise us if there should be a meeting posted. This is the same test that they use.
Yeah.
As Dr. Worley stated, I think this is just general Wisconsin public. Meeting.
Mrs. Meyer, may I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
So there was a pause, so I'm assuming that there's not additional comment on this policy. I want to hearken back to the continuity of organizational operation plan and information security. To do those things correctly, that's expensive. And it takes expert people to do it and to regularly keep it updated. So when we come to the question of administrative costs in the Fisher Building, as Dr. Means has rightfully informed us, to do things right, it's going to cost some money. And so I just want to point that out, that as we prepare budgets, to point to these policies where in today's world we do have to fund these protective activities for information and for continuity of operations. Thanks, that's all I have.
Right, anything else on the 8309? Okay, 8315, information management. The additions are just making sure that the policies are cross-referenced. And then the other piece of this is to clarify that when you're taking care of records and how long you keep them, we had this come up in a different, or is this basically says that if it's known that those records will be needed for a planned or expected court case, legal consideration, then they must still be maintained. It's a litigation hold procedure. And we talked about this when we did 8310 as well.
This is Meyer again. May I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
So I, before retiring, worked in a company that was a regulated business. And these record holds, that's another thing that's expensive to administer. You know, people aren't particular people, you know, we don't delete things anyway because we're a public entity. But I just want to highlight again, this kind of protective action, it you know, IT is going to need staffing to do this stuff. And so I just voiced that statement again. It's the truth, but just so everybody in the community knows that this is a complicated world these days, and things cost money to operate. Thanks.
Thank you. So we will go to 8325, receipt of legal documents by district employees. And here the wording is to make it clear that the legal documents would not be accepted on behalf of the district by the staff. And the role of the district in a situation where records are being dealt with, and then if a district staff is served with legal documents, the staff must immediately notify the building principal or superintendent The additions in green are to make sure that the policies and names are cross-listed accurately. Otherwise, there's not a lot of change to this. Any comments?
One question here, Dr. Jetspinger, is the duty to notify there, is there a specified modality in writing, over the phone, in person, that's acceptable, or is just notification period, way it's written?
You're asking, should you like to see that?
Just asking, yeah, if there's any reason to further clarify the notification or the duty to notify. They need to go beyond any specific measure. Does it need to be in writing, or is there anything that's protective on their part so that there's nothing lost in the process?
I would defer to what Neola would recommend.
Pass it out.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to 8410, crisis intervention. Okay, so updated to be only crisis intervention. It had other things in it previously that are covered elsewhere. Before 20, school safety. So on this one, this is a new policy. You will see that on the second page. Oh, before I get to that, in the beginning, where there's a choice, Dr. Means prefers every year to have this reviewed and approved, and we agreed as a committee, so that's why we selected the annually. And then the material that is redlined in pink, those would be options, but it was our consideration that it felt like this overstepped what is the area of responsibility of the board, and we want the board members to know there's an administrative document that exists that covers the list better.
Whose recommendation was it to scratch those items?
Well, when we heard that there was a policy or a procedure that the superintendent has that is slightly different, but is more comprehensive, we felt that belonged, that was the better place that it would belong.
Is it worth having this in a policy just to make sure that that procedure has these at a minimum covered? I'm thinking of like a new superintendent or new administrative team comes into the district, it might be good to just have, these are like the minimum safety concerns or measures the board would expect to be covered in that procedure.
Mrs. Meyer, may I be recognized?
Yes, sir.
I agree with what Board Member Harmo Rowland has said. Perhaps if we want to allow the superintendent to do more, instead of crossing out all of the Neola items, we add an item that says additional items may be covered by administrative action. Do you know what I mean? So I get that maybe Dr. Means's administrative guide is better, but I also am agreeing with what my co-board member has said, that maybe this is a minimum here and we want to allow more. Thanks.
Okay, we'll bring that back and talk about that at the policy committee. Thank you. Eighty-four 2001 epidemics and pandemics. This is new. And as far as the items that are crossed out, the recommendation of Neola is that those are typically only included in smaller school districts where there is not as much existing administrative documentation often. And so is there as a guide, kind of like you all were talking about with the last one, is there as a guide for what would be included? But the understanding I had is that the districts, peer districts typically don't list all of this out. Comments or questions?
As a minimum policy, knowing that the procedure would be more robust, the administrative procedure would be.
Yeah, I mean, it was Neola that said most districts
Don't have-
of peer size don't have this. Dr. Means, did you want to speak to either of these?
I think you just covered it.
I mean, we can have it in. It will mean more regular updating because administrative guide's more likely to be reviewed and updated based on public health policy, et cetera. But, you know, if that's something we want to propose, is that something you'd like to see all of these in?
Oh.
I mean, typically the superintendent doesn't walk away with all the documentation when they leave. But hopefully what they leave behind is a robust set of documentation. Okay, so we'll move on then to Z, the first reading of policy 8431, asbestos management. Sorry, 8431.01. My notes are, there is nothing new here other than changing from Board of Education to board.
I'm comfortable with that change.
Just one question on the lower section there. I was just curious in there, it says the superintendent will also ensure that at least once each school year, the district provides written notice to parents, employees, and employee organizations regarding the availability of the district's asbestos management plan and any response actions taken or planned. Is that something we're currently doing? Or does that fall into some form of communication that goes out annually?
It's one of those annual communications that go out at the beginning of the school year. Mr. Brightman?
Yeah, correct. It's something that we follow. It's the annual notice that happens at the beginning of the school year. Yep.
We could start a prize to see how many parents have read it.
Not this one.
Okay, so we'll go on to double A, first reading of policy 8442, reporting accidents. So this is basically not a major change again to board. And then as we know, we have multiple different personnel serving as the response person for first aid and for health, depending on the school. So using the option of appropriate personnel is the better option for our district. So employees wouldn't necessarily go to the school nurse, right? So we want to make sure this is speaking to everyone who is named in this.
Dr. Means, question here on this one. Is this limited to just physical injury?
No, it could also be an OSHA situation. It could be a number of different injuries that you can incur. That's why the strikeout of the school nurse was taken, because to assume that the school nurse is the only place or the only person that this could be reported to. In some cases, it needs to be the principal that needs to be notified.
Does this include, and I'm just thinking from my insurance time, some of the things I've seen in here where someone's claiming a emotional or psychological injury?
It could.
8531, free and reduced price meals. And here I want to point out I want to point out that this is a new policy. We need it for legal compliance. And we had some choices to make as we went through. We went with the recommendations of the district. Questions? Okay, we'll go on to vending machines. This one might get everyone excited, we'll see. So on 8540 vending machines, again, a change to the board. And then we have to align this with the contracts that we have, and also, is it DPI?
Mhm.
DPI rules. Any questions on what's crossed out?
For E, what does it mean that no products are vetted, which would conflict with especially health and nutrition? So like, what does that specifically mean?
The day and age of having vending machines with Cheetos in them
Okay.
are gone.
What was that?
So the after school, right? They aren't even turned on until,
They're not turned
not
on
turned on until after school.
until after school. But during the school day, you can't access those machines or those products because of the fact that we're part of the federal breakfast and lunch program.
Thank you.
Good question.
My daughter actually did an English project on trying to get those vending machines back on East, so I'll tell her that that won't happen.
Well, she could run for Congress.
Good learning experience.
Okay. So moving on to the next one. 8550 competitive food sales. I know this is one of great interest to students, right? But this is, sorry, I don't into it. This is a policy that outlines again, the things have to be in compliance with the federal law, and also when the sales of alternate foods by clubs and organizations can be had. And Dr. Means, I believe that option 2 is because of the contracts that we have with our food
Food
service.
service. This policy is also affectionately known as the Krispy Kreme policy. So when clubs want to sell products that students like to buy, there's a time period in which you have to give in order for that sale to take place. And that's why it designates the 30 minutes following the last school lunch period or the close of the school.
During the last lunch period? I didn't know that was a thing. Always like before and after school.
That this is a new policy.
So now you know.
This is a new
Let's spread the
policy. This, I think we're trying to give school, student clubs a little bit more flexibility.
While not being as competitive with food service plans. Plus food service, as we said, is held to federal standards, so not undermining that too much.
I was so mad when I was told my cookies were competing with Sodexo. My $1 cookies. They sell their cookies for $3.
Were they
They're chocolate chip.
chocolate chip?
Yeah,
They sell their cookies for $3.
probably tastier too, huh?
You would have won peanut butter, maybe you could have. I don't
They can't have peanut. All right, on to the next one.
Favorite cookie.
So this policy currently, compared to current policy, is different in which way?
If you notice the 30-minute period in the language that we outlined and you heard from the students, typically is a before or after school. I think it's giving our student clubs actual more flexibility to sell during the school day. That's part of the new language.
Does this policy allow before school selling?
See that flexibility in the language.
If we can, I would ask that that be explored.
To include
Before school.
before and after.
From like what I understand from this conversation is that
I don't know if that's.
Sodexo is,
That'd be a contact
open.
question, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we can explore it. I think the fact that we provided a preface is going to be the
That's-
challenge.
Understood. Are we currently allowing sales before school?
yes.
Yes. So I'd say if it doesn't violate our contract and or state policy or law, and that's kind of like local purview, then I would like to talk about that as a board in our next meeting.
Great.
I know.
I've heard the cookie lobby.
You know, I was an eyewitness to a before school bake sale this morning.
Saw nothing. Heard nothing.
We will be taking public comment at the next meeting. So if you have a thought on this before school cookie sales, please make sure to reach out to us by email.
It's a pressing issue for us students.
We totally understand. You know, you don't get that breakfast right before you leave, those before cookie sales. Yeah.
Is that 30-minute period the way it is because of like the board's values or the contractual agreement with the food supplier?
You know, we had a meeting earlier today of our cabinet and Mr. Brightman, among the many things he has on his plate right now, we have to do a request for proposal process for our food service. We have to do that every 5 years. And there's a lot of stipulations associated with our food service because it's a federally funded program. So as Dr. Worley and Mr. Morris has stated at the committee level, they will research what Dr. Jessup Anger is asking for, but those regulations have become tighter as the federal government has provided more assistance through their funds to support breakfast and lunch for students across the country.
Is there a time limit where we have the 30 minutes following the last school lunch period and the 30 minutes after the close of the school day? Primarily think about the one after the last school period. Is there a contractual time limit or a obligated time? Is that time limit 30 minutes, 1 hour, the entire rest of that time period until we get to after school?
30 minutes, it says.
It's only limited to 30 minutes.
Can they even be in the halls during those 30 minutes?
That happens, so it could be like that final period of the day, you could sell something in the hallways that's 30 minutes. And I think that's hence my statement of the flexibility. I think it gives, when you talk about 30 minutes after the lunch period or at the close of the school day, there's that end of the day.
6th and 7th hour that could be sold.
The only other time that this comes up is when our schools are used as polling places. It is common that elementary schools may do bake sales to those choosing to vote.
All right, we'll look into that.
And so that, I don't know if this policy would cover that because a lot of times we don't have school happening during major. But
We typically don't want to have school on the days in which our schools are used as a polling place.
correct. So that might be, I don't know if it needs to be a policy or not, but that's one of those things I wouldn't want to inadvertently take away, I think, a neat community fundraiser.
I'm thinking about wording for that too and ask the contractual. Okay, so we'll go to EE, policy 8600, transportation. This one's got a few points that we want to share. This is making clear when a district will provide transportation, at least our district, special education, IEP, determined by the superintendent to be necessary. Any questions?
Does this account for maybe, we have some students who attend our middle school or high schools before they're actually in middle school or high school. So Lincoln students who go to Longfellow for math or something. Does this policy address that or just students with special needs? And I know we don't typically provide transportation for those students, but if that was a hindrance on those kiddos to take that advanced class, would we add some language here? Possibly.
Would that fall under C?
Mr. Penny.
I'm not sure where it would fall, but it might also be worth a discussion around McKinney-Vento. There are federal regulations around transportation. I don't know if Neola had any CAN language from there, but a good amount of our transportation costs come from the McKinney-Vento requirements, which is a act for students experiencing homelessness.
Yes. To answer your question, yes.
I think there's a separate policy on it.
For McKinley-Vento?
Yeah.
I was speaking to Ms. Heimer-Rowan's question around the question of when we have students who matriculate to either middle school or high school and they're currently at the elementary or middle school level, do we provide transportation to those students? There's nothing formal in policy that it dictates that we can or cannot provide those services. So I think that would fall under C.
So we could think about how to be specific about wording because we're not sure parents would know how to know to ask for that. My own experience on the west side of town is that students have not even been allowed to walk for advanced classes from the middle school to the high school. They've been denied the advanced class option.
Dr. Marvel has her.
I'd just like to say that with the opportunity to have school growth coordinators, we have been able to find ways in which to provide access to transportation for students that need to move from the middle school to the high school or high school to or elementary school to the middle school. So as a result of having that role, we're able to provide that service.
That's good news. Anything else on this?
Do you think C covers that?
Yeah, C covers that. 8605, use of electronic wireless communication devices by district employee who operates board-owned or operated vehicles. Just an update of the definitions. Recognizing the use of this, the previous one was written before people use their phones regularly to find places. So this just gives guidance, well, of what you can do and what you can't do. You cannot send or read text messages, send or read emails. Anytime the operator is actively driving a district school bus or other board-owned vehicle during the course of employment with or without students on board. So only navigation. All right. E640 and this one is outlining and updating, I just need to open it, transportation related to field and other district sponsored trips, making sure that people are aware that there may be a charge for the cost of transportation. That would be oftentimes that send in $5. And if you can't, let us know. There are some sometimes transportation limitations. And the kinds of vehicles. And we did have a community member at the last meeting who at the end of our policy meeting, and we're going to look at this wording the next time we meet. Wanting that when people need to pay for field trips, there should be a statement in this for students with disabilities that need accessible vehicles, that they would only pay up to the same amount as students without disabilities. We haven't discussed that yet, but that's been proposed by a community member. So we'll be looking into that and wording for it and bringing that to you when it comes back for a second. E660 transportation by private vehicle. The board needs to outline who can transport a vehicle and the services that can be provided. What the person who is transporting will do.
May I ask why an employee of the board is crossed out? I can imagine reasons, pros and cons of why that is. And
Well, an employee of the board of the district shouldn't be transporting students in private vehicles.
Bringing our kids and their friends to sport.
That would be an approved volunteer or a parent of a student enrolled in the district. Right,
This makes it so that we're not transporting children.
right. So when I coached football, I had to drive the van with the linemen. I wouldn't put them in my truck and drive them myself.
you were driving a district.
I was driving a district issued vehicle.
And can we always provide district vehicles in situations like that? In Wawacha?
We have to.
Understood.
We would never want to, if the dance team advisor at Wauwatosa was, that's why they always defer to, we have to go to the parents or volunteer, for example, in those situations. But as an employee of the district, that person can't just say, I'm going to put those kids in my vehicle and transport them myself. Experience I ever had as a coach. I'll break the silence. I was charged with driving the defensive line to the big game against Menominee Falls. I had 4 defensive linemen, 3 of them were all-state. They were pretty good. I didn't know how to get to Menominee Falls. We were late to the game. Very late to the game. Like they were singing the national anthem late to the game.
Well, Menominee Falls does have some
It
confusing.
was a little confusing. I was a first year teacher and coach, and that was pretty humbling. So we won the game, but that's the reason why you should not have people in their own private vehicles.
Thanks for enlivening this stimulating conversation we're having about policy tonight.
Yes.
That brought a lot of joy to me.
I appreciate the fact you take solace in my,
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Menominee Falls is hard to get.
thank you.
I've never even heard of Menominee Falls.
So,
First time I drove
That's
there.
fair.
So it's an interesting experience. I also wanted to point out on this one that we did have a community comment at the policy meeting, and one of the things that we added to this was to make sure that people who were driving were going to use the safety equipment as appropriate, and we would mean, for example, seatbelts by state law, cars, booster seats. Oftentimes that's from if a parent is taking other kids, they may not, their kids might be a lot taller or bigger or and not need a booster seat. So this is also to make sure there's safety compliance on that wise.
Just had a clarifying question to make sure I'm interpreting correctly. This policy has come up a few times already since I've been in this role, and certainly in my past leadership roles in student services. As it's currently written, would this then open the door with the right parameters around it for, say, social workers, because that does come up quite often for them.
For social workers to be allowed to?
Yes, if they had the permission, if they followed this policy, they follow the guidelines. I was just a little confused when I was reading through what has been stricken and what is there, and confusion around the word volunteer. So I'm just looking for clarity so that when I interpret this in practice, I'm giving the right guidance.
Not volunteers, are they?
They're not.
They're not volunteers and they're not parents.
Say they wouldn't be covered in this policy, so we should probably ask how we could get.
If that is something you're seeking, yes, if that's.
Oh,
It comes up every year, at least here and in my past practice in this role.
So if you could ask Neola how to
It's
word it.
wording.
Yes, I can look into that.
So for a social worker or for a coach, and I assume we don't assess their ability to find their way to places, but do we do background checks for driving records? And I presume that would be written into the policy of like.
Or in a form that we would be asking them to fill out for advance permission.
Be in the contract or the subcontract. Policy, we should write, you do the background check through that.
Their drivers. I think, Mr. Pinion, we could explore the social worker aspect. There's also some liability that that social worker would be taking on that we need to consider as well.
They would have to be an approved driver, I would assume. Whereas for a parent, you don't have to go through the approved driver process. You just have to show you have, or you just have to, you're supposed to have the light insurance. Okay, anything else? That's the most lively conversation yet.
Maybe the vending.
Machines and driving, yeah, and cooking.
And cookies, true. Okay, 8,700. Policy on lactating employees. New. This is new, right?
This is new
Yeah.
from the updated remote when they changed the title from
Right.
breastfeeding mothers to lactating
Right.
employees.
And yes, it used to be nursing mothers.
Nursing mothers,
It's been
yes.
nursing mothers and now it's lactating employees. And we also clarifying that this covers the expression of breast milk. It does not cover breastfeeding in the school district properties. And the expectation, a lot of this is federal law too, but the expectation for a space for that expressing of milk. We did have a conversation at policy. Typically, or the federal law is that you have to provide this for 1 calendar year. We decided we wanted to be more open and support longer opportunities. So we changed the wording to no less than, that is Wauwatosa wording. And then we clarified that this is not a policy that applies to students. That is a different process for students rather than employees.
Moving on to policy 8710 insurance. Let's see here. Some new one, the other as well, yeah. This is another new policy on here just to get us legally compliant. And basically it's all pretty standard in here with the board shall purchase with its district funds, the type and amount of insurance necessary to protect the district from major financial losses. Everything in there is, I think, fairly self-explanatory unless anybody has any questions in particular.
Also required, so I don't really have a choice on this one. And there's a wording you want to shift.
Questions, we'll move on to policy 8740, protection of district funds. And this is also one that's legally required. And it's basically on here, it's just guidelines and policy here for exactly what it says, protection of district funds. The board will recognize that prudent trusteeship of the resources of the district dictates the employees responsible for the safekeeping of the district monies and property be bonded or alternatively be covered by an insurance policy issued by a board approved and admitted insurance carrier or joint self-insurance pool, which I believe this is the one, Lynn, that we had that we don't have specific individual bonds.
Right, so it used to be it was by individuals, certain individuals. Now it's a blanket policy standard.
And then again, that just includes all district monies and property. So there we'll go on to policy 8760, student accident insurance.
So this is the one where there's been in the past. It was handled differently and now it's through parents and it's due. Parents can access it online, but just clarifying that this is at the expense of the parents. So parents can join this group accident insurance if they want to. It's optional.
Moving on to policy 8770, joint self-insurance pool.
This just creates a structure by which it regulates that we can have self-insurance, which is what we do.
And mandated by law.
And it's mandated by law to have this policy, right?
Moving forward to policy 8800, religious activities and observances. This one was also, this one was new and bring us legally compliant. And Dr. Beans, wasn't there a specific, we had a specific reference to what this was, some
Court case.
court case behind this with the kneeling coach.
This is
The coach.
the football coaches again. This is the coach. If you remember, I think it was in Virginia where he prayed with his team
The Kennedy
after the
decision.
game. And so this kind of creates, it was a Supreme Court ruling. That's why you see the 20 United States Supreme Court 4071 reference there. But it kind of provides rules for how religious expression can be shared in a school setting.
And the voluntary nature of participation.
Questions there. We'll move forward to policy 8800.01, religious observation regarding school activities.
This policy is different than 8800 in that it coincides with the work that the board did with the calendars for next year for the 24-25 and 25-26 school years. It lays out the rules and how we can recognize when a family will want to leverage this capability of having days off. So instead of, again, if you remember, we tried to initially identify a high holy day for one religion through really good high-level board policy discussions. We decided that we wanted to create that space for all of our families. The Division of Academic Performance will create a calendar at some point that kind of lists what we consider to be the high holy days. This is in keeping with what a lot of higher ed institutions do. We've seen this model used specifically at UW and at Michigan State, where they identify the high holy days for a number of different religions, and it allows families to identify those days for observances. And staff, not students, but staff as well.
If this policy is approved, is there going to be a process put into place where we inform families about
Yes.
this? Will it be in the family handbook and explicitly told to families?
Yes.
To note that we're doing some ground setting or on this, some other districts will now be looking at this policy and how we put it together, and particularly the flexibility that it brings to families to be able to follow their observances and faith. This outlines how a teacher or staff would go about if they have some concerns over what's happening. And it makes clear that by giving this list of key ones that could be added to, that in general, the staff will be paying attention as they put their schedules and syllabi together to do their best to avoid having a situation where a student is assigned an exam that can't be moved during those days.
All right. Move on to the next one, policy 8802, patriotic activities and observances. And the primary change here was just an addition of adding the word reprimanded. So previously it was that in an example here of standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or any type of ceremony that a student may not be compelled against the students no student may be compelled against the student's objections. We added in there the word reprimanded so that they didn't feel that there was any type of negative recourse should they not want to participate with the rest of the group.
Yeah, state law requires that students hear every day one of those two. But a community member and some discussion ensued in our committee about making it clear that it's not just that they don't have to stand, but there should be no staff retribution or negative commentary on that decision of a student.
This is an important policy. I would just, I remember vividly, I received an email from a community member who attended a sporting event and was disturbed that students were not paying attention and reciting the anthem or singing with the national anthem. So this policy is really, it's important that we recognize that these are the laws that govern the school district. There's nothing compelling us, nor as a student supervisor, I don't have the ability to pull a student out of the crowd to say you were not complying or reciting the national anthem. Under this policy, we wouldn't have that authority.
At the same time, parents cannot ask that it not be presented. So it offers, or anyone community members cannot ask that it not be. It offers, because the law requires it, but it offers everyone their way of participating.
Yes.
We're on to QQ, the final one for the evening, policy 8900 fraud. This one is pretty basic, but it brings us into legal compliance there that, again, something very simple is the board is committed to protecting the financial assets of the district, and that basically all employees are obligated to report fraud. The superintendent, in coordination with the district staff, will provide the appropriate internal controls to, diminish and reduce any opportunity for theft or any type of fraud, subject to any type of guidance for discipline.
In my time period here so far, 8900 has been referenced. It is something that we have to pay attention to, and it governs the behavior of people when they're signing contracts, when they are they're doing RFPs. That's why we do RFPs. That's why we have process in place. So this policy, while it may seem very boilerplate and simplistic, it has been referenced, and it is important to follow.
Questions on fraud?
Should we discuss procedure? Would the board like those ones that did not have comments tonight to be put on a consent agenda with the ability to pull them off if people think of things? And then the ones that did have comments to be, have those changes made, and then when the second read be action item.
I would be supportive of that. I would look to my colleagues, Ms. Hammerall and Mr. Meyer. Any thoughts?
Mrs. Meyer, I'm fine. with what was just stated.
So anything that doesn't have any
We
changes?
have comments or changes tonight, we would put it on a consent agenda, which still means that people who weren't part of the discussion night could pull that off.
Yep.
Individually from the consent agenda. But then those that we had comments and questions on, we would we'd look at the next policy. So those could move forward anytime there's a room on a meeting. And then the others, the ones that were commented on tonight, we would then go back to policy committee, work on the wording and bring them back after the next policy committee meeting.
Sounds great. Lots of work done clearly to prepare these tonight. Where are we going next? What's kind of you'll bring back, I'm curious kind of like what we would see next from the policy committee as you're marching
Next
through all
would
these.
be 9,000s, right? Dr. Means?
Yes.
9,000s, 1,000s, those are superintendent. We just did 8,000s. And then later in the year, we go to 2,000s and then 3,000s. So 2,000s is slated for around April. 8, 9, and 1,000 were slated for October. So we're working through all those. And we also have a couple of items that have come up. The interdistrict transfer resident, you had an email about that. That is a policy we've already revised once this year, but now that we're thinking, people have questions about that related to open enrollment, we'll bring that back on an agenda. So that can come back, but it's not, what was asked today was not something that was actually covered under 501(3). So we didn't attend to it. That's a separate policy.
Understood. Okay.
Dr. Jesselbanger, if I may, I think the work that the policy committee has completed is not just the volume of policies that you received this evening. They know all the language. I think they deserve a lot of credit. I also want to thank the full board because you had to read all of them to make this meeting useful as well. But so we, from an administrative standpoint, we just want to say thank you to the committee and to the board.
Outstanding. Seeing no other comments or questions right now from the board, thank you, Dr. Worley and Mr. Morris, very much. We will expect to see then at our next board meeting, which I believe is next Monday. Everything that you have that was not a kind of a discussion point or needs to go back to the policy committee would show up on the consent agenda. And anything that would need to go back to the policy committee, then we would bring up at our next regularly scheduled meeting after that policy committee, after you had a chance to discuss. So thank you very much for your good work. Dr. Worley, could I have a motion to adjourn?
You want to say the time first?
It is 7:44 p.m.
I move to adjourn.
Seconds. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoig, Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rolland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.